My name is John Anderson. I have had a simple life. I grew up on the streets of Chicago, working menial jobs, and my biggest dream was to retire and live a peaceful life by the ocean. But my life has changed in ways I never expected. I am now trying to survive on one of the most dangerous planets in the galaxy, ruled by a tyrant who rules the entire galaxy with an iron fist, and I am a human waging war against this tyrannical government. Let me tell you how I got here. On that day, everything began as normal. I was helping a friend of mine repair an old model spaceship. Yes, there was such a thing as space tourism, and I was eager to try it whenever I could, but there was a problem with this vehicle. As a result of a malfunction, I found myself landing hard on the surface of an unknown planet. When I opened my eyes, I was surrounded by huge structures and armed alien troops. I immediately realized that this was definitely not like Earth. I soon learned that this planet was called Calthor and was ruled by a terrible tyrant, Zarkin, whose desire to rule the entire galaxy manifested itself in bloodshed and oppression. Even the Galactic Alliance was powerless against Zarkin. His technology was beyond that of any other species. Zarkin's soldiers were as obedient as robots, and his people were helpless. I don't know what drew me to this chaotic world, but I knew my way out would not be easy. When one of Zarkin's soldiers noticed me, he pointed his gun at me. I tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. At that moment, the only thing I could do was to use my intelligence to survive. The soldier approached me and said something in a foreign language that I didn't understand. Just as he was about to fire his weapon, I quickly grabbed a piece of metal that had fallen to the ground and threw it at the weapon in the soldier's hand. Luckily, I hit him, and the gun's firing mechanism broke. Then, while the soldier was surprised, I quickly jumped on him and knocked him down. I was out of breath. It was pure luck that a man could survive against such a powerful soldier. But this was only the beginning. There was no turning back now. I would either survive on this planet or perish. In time, I met the planet's resistance, a small group fighting against Zarkin's tyranny, but they were desperate. I was no leader to them, but I knew I could lead them with my intelligence and strategic thinking. The local technology of the planet Calthor was foreign to me, but some of its basic principles were similar to Earth's technology. I repaired the old and broken equipment of the resistance fighters and taught them how to set simple but effective traps. It wasn't long before I attracted Zarkin's attention. After a few daring actions, I knew I was on his radar. Zarkin didn't believe a human could cause so much trouble. But I wasn't just fighting to survive. I was fighting to save this planet and its people from this tyrant who, while confident in his power, failed to understand that true power lies in a spirit that never gives up. Over time, I gained a reputation among the resistance. At first they saw me as an outsider. They thought humans were physically weak, unable to withstand the harsh conditions of the planet. But small victories make a big difference in the eyes of the people. Our first victory came when we ambushed a caravan of Zarkin soldiers. Although they were technologically advanced, a simple trap I had planned was enough to bring them down. I used a magnetic device made from local minerals to disrupt their communication system. Deprived of communication, the soldiers were thrown into utter chaos, and together with the resistance, we neutralized them one by one. The rebels were astonished. One little person had done something they would never have dared to do. But for me, this was only the beginning. I knew how powerful Zarkin was. It was only a matter of dealing with one of his vast armies. His real power lay behind his technology, and I planned to use that power to our advantage. My closest friend in the resistance was a warrior named Kale. He was a native of Calthor and had suffered under Zarkin's cruelty. His brother had been brutally murdered by Zarkin's soldiers, and he had fought against the tyrant ever since. But Kale's spirit was nearly broken. "We cannot defeat Zarkin, it is impossible," he told me many times. But each time I told him of the determination and hope of humanity. We had seen many wars in the world. Countless dictators, countless tyrants had fallen throughout history. With our intelligence and willpower, we could overthrow Zarkin. To defeat Zarkin's armies, we could not defeat them in direct battle. They were too numerous, and their technology was frightening. But Zarkin's greatest weakness was his arrogance. He despised people, especially me. In his eyes, I was just an insect, whereas I aimed to be the most dangerous of all insects. Our plan was to destroy Zarkin's communications network and isolate him from his own people. We had to make him vulnerable to his people. One night, Kale and the other resistance fighters and I infiltrated Zarkin's most important communication center, the Saria Tower, a hub that issued commands to his armies all over the planet. If we could neutralize this tower, we could seriously shake Zarkin's control. Of course, capturing the tower would not be easy. It was surrounded by advanced sensors, patrolling soldiers, and automated defense systems. But I had planned every step. Under the bewildered gaze of the resistance fighters, I hacked the systems and short-circuited the defenses. When we entered the tower, we knew that time was running out. We had to complete our mission before Zarkin discovered our presence. When we reached the computer terminal, I started the hacking process. Using a simple but effective algorithm that I had learned from Earth Technologies, I began to disable all of Zarkin's systems. The Resistance didn't understand what I was doing, but they trusted me. It was the first time they had ever fully trusted the intelligence of a human being. When communication with Zarkin's armies was cut off, chaos ensued. Every military unit was helpless, unable to move, waiting for orders. At that moment, I realized that Zarkin's army, which considered itself invincible, was actually completely dependent on technology. Humans could sometimes win great victories with very simple things, but that victory would not last long. Zarkin realized that there was something behind this small resistance, and as I had predicted, he would eventually come for me. One morning, Zarkin's chief advisor delivered a message to the Resistance through a giant holographic screen. Zarkin demanded a face-to-face meeting with the leader of the Resistance. Kale and the other Resistance fighters told me not to fall for it, but this was my chance. Zarkin's arrogance and contempt for my intelligence would leave him vulnerable. It was time to stop this tyrant. When I accepted Zarkin's offer, there was a deep silence among the Resistance. "This is madness," Kale said, pulling me into a corner. "He thinks you are just a human being, which is why he despises you. But he is a cruel genius. If you face him, you will fight a war from which there is no return." I understood Kale's concern, but Zarkin's arrogance was our greatest weapon. He may bring his intelligence, his technology, and all his might to bear, but it is the human spirit that never gives up that will defeat him. I would not give in to Zarkin. Even though I wasn't sure what I was going to do, I believed I could turn this encounter to my advantage. The meeting was to be held in Zarkin's palace. The palace was built on the highest hill in Calthar, and even from a distance it struck fear into the hearts of all who saw it. It was a vast, sinister structure, equipped with advanced technology. It was the symbol of Zarkin's power. I set sail for the palace on one of the old Resistance ships. I was alone on board, but my mind was filled with 1,000 thoughts. How could I end this encounter victoriously? I didn't know exactly what to expect, but I was determined to meet Zarkin face to face. When I reached the entrance to the palace, the great doors opened with a mechanical hum. As I stepped inside, Zarkin's soldiers surrounded me. But strangely, they let me go and led me into the main hall of the palace. The interior of the palace was rich and opulent in contrast to the cold metallic exterior. Every corner was filled with technological marvels that showcased Zarkin's power and splendor. Finally, I reached the hall where a huge throne stood. On it sat Zarkin, a much larger and more intimidating being than I had expected. His face was stern, his eyes filled with a shimmering blue light. Around him were intricate devices, like part of the armor that surrounded his arms and body. Slowly he stood and spoke, his voice a metallic timbre that carried to every corner of the hall. "Here is the human, a small being who challenges me. It is hard to believe that a weak creature like you could cause so much trouble, but here you are. Are you brave or foolish? It's hard to decide." I took a deep breath and decided to face him. "I may be a bug in your eyes, Zarkin, but you forget one thing. Even insects can bring down a giant if they are bored enough. I cannot fight your technology alone, but I have something that can defeat you and your system: intelligence and a will that never quits." Zarkin paused for a moment. Then a haughty smile appeared on his face. Intelligence. What a primitive creature like you calls intelligence is nothing compared to my technology. But if you are so confident, I will give you a chance. Challenge me, human. Zarkin was arrogant enough to accept this challenge, and that was his biggest mistake. I knew I had to use this to my advantage. I quickly began to formulate a plan. Zarkin's technology and power were completely dependent on him. He was his slave. The moment he lost his power, he would be helpless. My mission was to deprive him of that power. During our discussion with him, I secretly activated a device I carried with me, similar to the frequency jammer I had used in the Saria Tower. It was programmed to emit a frequency that would temporarily disable any technological devices attached to Zarkin's armor. If the device worked, Zarkin's reliance on technology would leave him vulnerable. Zarkin approached me with great strides and said, "Come, human, show me your power." I silently bided my time, and as I approached step by step, I realized that the device was activated. Zarkin stopped in front of me and raised his hand to crush me. But at that moment, the frequency emitted by the device reached his armor and the systems it was connected to. Zarkin's body shook. The blue light in his eyes flickered slightly, and the massive energy currents in his armor ceased. For a moment, the hall fell silent. Zarkin stumbled, as if he had lost control. Without his technology, his massive body had become a mere burden. I didn't miss the moment. Zarkin's astonishment revealed his weakness. "You see, Zarkin," I said, "you are paying the price for being so dependent on your technology. You draw your strength from machines, but my strength is within me, in my spirit that never gives up." When the light returned to Zarkin's eyes, I realized that the device had had only a fleeting effect. But even that brief moment was enough to show him that I could be a real threat. Now he had to make a choice. I might not have enough power to destroy him completely, but I could force him to retreat. Zarkin took a step back. "I didn't think it would come to this," he said. "But this is only the beginning, human. I will not leave the fate of this planet in the hands of you and a human." It was then that I realized that Zarkin had retreated. It was not only a physical victory, but a psychological one as well. Zarkin had underestimated the power of a human, but now he knew he could no longer do so. As he retreated, I gave him a final message. "The people of this planet will no longer live under your yoke. The resistance is growing, and the never-giving spirit of man will bring you down." After Zarkin's retreat, I quickly left the palace, and the resistance was overjoyed to learn that the plan had succeeded. Kale approached me, his face a mixture of surprise, admiration, and hope. "You really did it," he said. "You showed Zarkin that one man can stand up to him." Zarkin may have retreated, but he was still in power. I alone could not destroy his armies, but to defeat him completely, we now had a great asset, the hope and courage of the people of Calthar. Zarkin's retreat was a small victory, but it was a great spark in the eyes of the people. The fall of the Tower of Saria and the success at Zarkin's court quickly spread across the planet. The people who had believed Zarkin to be invincible now saw his weaknesses. They understood that humans were not to be underestimated. On Calthar, the number of people who wanted to join the resistance grew rapidly. Those who had lived in fear now rose up in courage. Zarkin's soldiers were not as strong as before. The collapse of their communication networks had disrupted their battle strategy. They were disorganized and uncoordinated. Together with Kale, we organized the resistance. Though we were still technologically inferior to Zarkin's armies, we developed tactics that tapped into the intelligence and survival instincts of the people. Every village, every town was now part of the resistance against Zarkin. We slowly weakened his forces by trapping them, sabotaging their resources, and with each attack, Zarkin grew weaker and weaker. But the real blow was struck when fear was completely struck from the hearts of the Calthar people. Zarkin's final move was to gather the rest of his army and strike at the heart of the resistance. He planned a massive attack on our resistance bases in the center of the planet. But this time we were prepared. We set up a clever ambush. Just as Zarkan's army was surrounded by resistance fighters, we captured him through a secret passage we had built under the old Saria Tower. He thought Zarkan would prove his power again by facing the resistance, but his technology couldn't help him this time. Zarkan collapsed before the resistance, having lost all his strength. At that moment, Kale and the other resistance fighters looked at him with rage in their eyes. Zarkan had once been a cruel tyrant who had ruled the galaxy, but now he was nothing more than a defeated, arrogant being. "You underestimated the people of this planet, Zarkan," I said. "You tried to rule with technology, but the real power was in the hearts and minds. The people of Calthar will no longer live under your yoke." Zarkan looked at me one last time. "Humans, you are dangerous," he said in a weak voice. "I underestimated you." Those were Zarkan's last words. The age of the tyrant was over in Calthar. Zarkan's fall brought not only victory, but freedom to the people of Calthar. Celebrations erupted across the planet. When Zarkan's reign ended, everyone who had been part of the resistance felt like a hero. But the greatest reward was that one man, with only his courage and intelligence, had been able to defeat the most ruthless tyrant in the galaxy. Finally, Kale came over and looked at me. "We are free now," he said, a twinkle in his eye. "Thanks to you." "Thanks to all of us," I said, shaking my head slightly. "This victory is not just mine, it is all of ours." The defeat of Zarkan showed that humans are driven not only by technology, but by spirit. Now Calthar can determine its own destiny. And so the people of Calthar stepped out of Zarkan's shadow and into freedom. The victory spread throughout the galaxy. Humans were now seen as a threat not only because of their fighting spirit, but also because of their intelligence. Every force in the galaxy would now scrutinize humans more closely. But for me, this story didn't end with the liberation of the Calthar people. It was a story of humanity proving its place in the galaxy. And that was only the beginning.